started with an odd visit from my neighbor, Mark. A guy I barely knew. The kind of person you nod to while grabbing the mail, maybe say hey to during a barbecue. He wasn't chatty, which is why his knock on my door late one evening felt off. I opened the door, expecting some trivial complaint about my lawn or a package left on his porch by mistake. Instead, Mark stood there, his face pale under the porch light. He glanced over his shoulder, like he was checking if someone was watching. "Ryan," he said, voice low and serious. "I need to talk to you." I stepped aside, letting him in. This wasn't the kind of conversation you had standing on the front step. Mark didn't waste time. "I saw Emily," he said, looking me dead in the eyes. "Not at work, not at the store. She was with someone. In a way that didn't look like friendship." For a moment, I didn't react. My brain refused to process the words. I just stared at him, trying to decide if this was some bizarre prank or a mistake. "You're sure?" I finally asked, my voice calm but my stomach twisting into knots. He nodded. "I've seen her a couple of times. Different places. Same guy. I thought maybe it was a misunderstanding. But," he sighed, "it wasn't." I wanted to tell him he was wrong, to get out of my house with this garbage. But something about the way he said it, the quiet urgency, the almost apologetic tone, kept me from brushing it off. Mark wasn't the kind of person to stir the pot without good reason. "Where?" I asked. "Downtown," he replied. "Last time was at a restaurant." They were sitting in a corner booth, pretty cozy. I didn't mean to spy, but it was hard not to notice. Mark stayed for a few more minutes, offering vague details and awkward apologies, but I barely heard him. My mind was racing. Emily had been working late a lot recently, claiming back-to-back meetings and team dinners. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. After Mark left, I sat in the living room, staring at nothing. My gut told me to confront Emily right away, to demand answers. But another part of me, the colder, more calculating side, wanted proof. When she came home that night, cheerful and full of stories about her productive day, I played along. I smiled, nodded, and pretended like I wasn't already planning my next move. By the time she kissed me goodnight and went to bed, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to accuse her without evidence. I needed to see it for myself. Mark gave me the starting point. Now it was my turn to find out the truth. The next morning, Emily acted like nothing was wrong. She kissed me goodbye as she left for work, her smile bright, her laugh light. She even reminded me to pick up groceries on my way home. It felt surreal, like I was in a movie where everyone except me knew the script. But I was done being the clueless husband. I started with her phone. Not by snooping outright. I knew Emily was too smart for that. If she was hiding something, it wouldn't be in plain sight. Instead, I waited until she was in the shower and casually checked her notifications. Nothing unusual. No mysterious messages or unknown numbers. She even had her work email open on the screen, like she was daring someone to look. She was covering her tracks, I realized. This wasn't going to be easy. That's when I decided to follow her. Emily's routine was predictable, or so I thought. She left for work at 8 a.m. sharp and usually came home around 6 p.m. But when I parked down the street from her office that day, something didn't sit right. She walked into the building, sure, but only stayed for 15 minutes. 15 minutes. I watched as she came back out, looking around like she was checking to see if anyone was watching. Then she walked briskly down the block and climbed into the passenger seat of a car. A black sedan. The driver was a man, mid-30s, wearing sunglasses and a cocky smirk. I didn't recognize him, but the way Emily smiled at him, it wasn't the smile she gave me. My chest tightened as they drove off. I felt a mix of fury and disbelief, but I forced myself to stay focused. I trailed them, keeping a safe distance, my hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. They didn't go far. A small hotel on the edge of downtown. Nothing fancy, just the kind of place people go when they don't want to be seen. I parked across the street, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to storm in there and drag her out by the arm, demanding an explanation. But another part of me, the part that kept me rooted to my seat, knew it wasn't time. Not yet. Instead, I reached for my phone. If Emily thought she could lie her way out of this, she had another thing coming. I snapped photos as they walked into the hotel together, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. And then I waited. An hour passed. Then two. My anger simmered, bubbling just below the surface. When they finally came out, they looked relaxed, casual. Emily was fixing her hair, and the man had his arm draped lazily over her shoulder. I recorded a short video as they said goodbye, capturing the way she kissed him. Slow, lingering, passionate. The kind of kiss she hadn't given me in months. By the time I got home, I had all the proof I needed, but instead of feeling satisfied, I felt hollow. Like someone had scooped out my insides and left me with nothing but anger and confusion. Emily walked through the door a couple of hours later, acting like everything was normal. She even brought takeout, claiming she'd grabbed it on her way home from work. I played along just like I had the night before, but inside I was a storm. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to destroy her lies. That night, I couldn't sleep. Emily was next to me, snoring softly, her face peaceful in the dim light. How could she look so innocent? How could she share a bed with me, laugh with me, eat dinner with me, knowing what she was doing behind my back? The proof I had wasn't enough. Not yet. Photos and a video would catch her in a lie, but I wanted more. I didn't just want to accuse her. I wanted to crush the facade she'd so carefully built. The next day, I called in sick to work. Emily left at her usual time, giving me a kiss on the cheek and a sweet, "Feel better," before walking out the door. As soon as she was gone, I grabbed my keys and left too, tailing her from a distance. She didn't go to work. Of course, she didn't. This time, her destination was a coffee shop downtown. She sat at a table near the window, sipping her latte and scrolling through her phone. She looked relaxed, like she didn't have a single worry in the world. The guy showed up 20 minutes later. Same man, same black sedan. He slid into the seat across from her, and they started talking, laughing, leaning in close. She touched his arm at one point, and I felt a hot wave of anger rise in my chest. I parked where they couldn't see me and walked into the coffee shop, keeping my distance but close enough to hear snippets of their conversation. "You're so bad," she said at one point, giggling like a teenager. "Only with you," he replied, grinning like he'd won the lottery. It was nauseating. They talked for about an hour before leaving. I followed them again, this time to a park on the other side of town. They sat on a bench, holding hands and talking like they were in some kind of twisted rom-com. I took more photos, recorded another video. Every moment felt like a punch to the gut, but I couldn't stop. I wasn't just gathering evidence. I was preparing for war. When they finally parted ways, I stayed behind, staring at the spot where they'd been sitting. I felt like a stranger in my own life, watching everything I'd built crumble around me. That night, when Emily came home, she was in a fantastic mood. She cooked dinner, something she hadn't done in weeks, and poured me a glass of wine. "You've been working so hard lately," she said, smiling like a saint. "You deserve to relax." Her words were like poison, sweet on the surface but deadly underneath. I played along, smiling and thanking her, but inside, I was seething. She thought she had me fooled. She thought her lies were airtight. What she didn't know was that I wasn't just gathering proof. I was setting the stage. The game had begun, and I wasn't planning to lose. The next morning, Emily was up early, humming to herself as she got ready for her day at the office. She kissed me goodbye as usual, lingering for just a moment longer than usual. "Don't forget," she said, smiling sweetly. "I've got that late meeting tonight, so don't wait up for me." The audacity. I forced a smile and nodded, watching her walk out the door like nothing in the world could touch her. This time, I didn't follow her right away. I already knew where she was going, the same man, the same lies. Instead, I started putting my plan into motion. First, I called Mark. I hadn't told him much after his initial warning, but now I needed a second pair of eyes. "You were right," I said, keeping my tone steady despite the rage simmering underneath. "I've got proof. I need your help." Mark didn't hesitate. "What do you need?" "I want to hit her where it hurts," I said. "But I need to know more about this guy. Can you help me figure out who he is?" Mark agreed, and within an hour, he was parked outside the coffee shop Emily frequented, waiting for her to show up. Meanwhile, I started digging into our shared finances. That's when I found the credit card statements. Hidden in plain sight were charges that didn't match our usual spending. Hotel bookings, expensive dinners, even a boutique jewelry store I'd never heard of. The dates lined up perfectly with her girls' nights and work events. The jewelry was the last straw. She'd been buying gifts. For him, no doubt. While I paid the bills and planned for our future. Mark called me later that afternoon with an update. "They're at the coffee shop again," he said. "And guess what? I got a photo of his license plate when they left." I thanked him, feeling a small spark of satisfaction amidst the storm of anger. With the license plate, I could track him down and learn everything about the man who was wrecking my life. That evening, Emily came home late as promised, her hair slightly disheveled and a faint hint of cologne clinging to her clothes. Not my cologne. "How was your meeting?" I asked, forcing my tone to stay light as I leaned against the kitchen counter. "Exhausting," she sighed, dropping her bag on the floor. "I don't know why they always schedule these things so late." The lie rolled off her tongue effortlessly. She walked over and hugged me, resting her head on my shoulder. "You're the best, you know that? So patient with my crazy schedule." I froze for a moment, every instinct screaming at me to call her out right then and there. But instead, I kissed her forehead and said, "Anything for you." She smiled, oblivious to the storm brewing behind my eyes. That night, as she slept soundly next to me, I stared at the ceiling, planning my next move. The mask she wore was flawless, but cracks were starting to show. And soon I would shatter it entirely. The morning after Emily's late-night meeting, I made my first move. Mark had sent me a clear photo of the license plate, and I used it to run a search online. A few clicks later, I had a name: Tyler Blake. Tyler was exactly the type of guy I'd imagined, a cliché. He owned a trendy marketing agency, had a perfectly curated Instagram filled with gym selfies and flashy cars, and seemed to live for attention. The more I read, the more disgusted I felt. This was the man she'd chosen over me? I wasn't going to confront her yet, but I needed to send a message. Something subtle but undeniable. Emily had a habit of leaving her phone lying around when she was at home. She thought I never looked at it, and for the most part, she was right. But I didn't need to look. I needed access. That afternoon, while she was in the shower, I unlocked her phone. She'd been careless enough to set her passcode as our anniversary date. The irony almost made me laugh. I didn't scroll through her messages or photos. That would come later. For now, I went straight to her contacts and saved Tyler's number under a new name, Mark Neighbor. Then, I sent him a message from her phone. "Can't stop thinking about you. Last night was amazing. Let's meet again soon." It was risky, I knew that, but I wanted to see how she'd react when her perfectly crafted world started to crumble. When Emily got out of the shower, she didn't notice a thing. She went about her day, cheerful and oblivious. But later that evening, her phone buzzed while we were watching TV. I glanced over as she picked it up, her face instantly changing when she saw the notification. Tyler had replied. "Everything okay?" I asked, pretending not to notice her sudden tension. "Yeah, just a spam text," she said quickly, locking her phone and setting it face down on the coffee table. She was good, calm, composed. But for the first time I saw it, a crack in her mask. The rest of the evening was uneventful, but I could tell she was distracted. She checked her phone more often than usual, her fingers flying across the screen when she thought I wasn't looking. The next day, I decided to escalate. While Emily was at her usual morning coffee shop rendezvous, I called the hotel she'd been visiting with Tyler. Posing as a manager from her office, I claimed she'd left a personal item behind during her last stay and asked for the name on the reservation. "Tyler Blake," the clerk confirmed without hesitation. Bingo. When Emily came home that night, I was ready. I didn't confront her outright. No, that would have been too easy. Instead, I left her a small gift. A printout of the hotel's booking confirmation, folded neatly and tucked into her work bag. I wanted to watch her squirm. I wanted her to know that her secrets weren't as safe as she thought. That evening, as she was getting ready for bed, I noticed her pause by her bag. She pulled out the folded paper, her face draining of color as she unfolded it. "What's this?" she asked, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. "Oh, I thought it was one of your work papers," I said with a shrug. "I found it on the table and figured you'd need it." Her hand trembled slightly as she shoved the paper back into her bag. "It's nothing," she muttered. "Just an old receipt." But I saw the panic in her eyes. The first strike had landed. And it was only the beginning. The next morning, Emily's demeanor had changed. Her usual carefree energy was replaced with a strained politeness. She was trying too hard, laughing a little too loud, smiling a little too long. She didn't bring up the paper from her bag. But the tension in the air was undeniable. It was a perfect opportunity to press her without actually confronting her. "Everything okay?" I asked over breakfast, pretending to be concerned. She looked up sharply, her fork pausing mid-air. "Of course," she said with a too bright smile. "Why wouldn't it be?" I shrugged, sipping my coffee. "I don't know. You've just seemed distracted lately." Her eyes flickered for a moment, a brief flash of panic, before she forced another smile. "Work's been stressful, that's all. Nothing to worry about." Her lies were becoming easier to spot. I let it go, knowing she was already on edge. While Emily went about her day, I stayed home to prepare my next move. I'd been holding back, gathering my pieces, but now it was time to tighten the web. First, I created a burner email account. Using it, I sent Tyler a message from an anonymous address. "Your girlfriend isn't as faithful as you think. Ask her about her husband. Better yet, check her phone." I knew this would set something in motion. Tyler might confront her, or she might scramble to cover her tracks. Either way, it would create chaos in their little affair, forcing Emily to juggle lies on multiple fronts. Next, I set up a small camera in the living room, hidden in plain sight among the knickknacks on the bookshelf. If Emily tried to call or text Tyler from home, I wanted to catch it. That evening, Emily came home looking exhausted. She barely spoke during dinner, her eyes darting to her phone every few minutes. She didn't touch her wine, which was unusual, and excused herself to bed early. I waited until she was asleep before checking the camera footage. Sure enough, about an hour after she'd gone to bed, she'd come back into the living room with her phone in hand. She'd paced the floor as she typed furiously, her face tense and her movements sharp. She muttered to herself a few times, her words too quiet to catch, but the frustration was clear. Finally, she made a call. "Why would you say that?" she hissed, keeping her voice low. "I told you he doesn't suspect anything." There was a pause as the person on the other end, Tyler, I assumed, responded. Emily groaned, running a hand through her hair. "Just calm down. I'll fix it, okay? He's not going to find out. I've got it under control." Under control. She had no idea how wrong she was. The next day, I decided to turn up the pressure even more. While she was out, I moved her things, just subtly enough to make her question herself. A pair of earrings went from her jewelry box to the nightstand. Her favorite sweater disappeared into the laundry basket, even though she'd just worn it. When she came home that evening, the cracks were showing. She looked tired, frazzled, and suspicious. "Did you touch my stuff?" she asked abruptly as I cooked dinner. "Your stuff," I replied innocently, glancing over my shoulder. "My earrings," she said, narrowing her eyes. "They were in the jewelry box, and now they're—" "Never mind." I shrugged, returning to the stove. "Maybe you moved them and forgot. You've been pretty stressed lately." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. That night, I watched as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought she was in control, but her confidence was crumbling. It was exactly what I wanted. The next morning, Emily woke up visibly unsettled. Her usual routine was rushed, her movements sharper, more frantic. She barely spoke to me as she gathered her things, muttering something about a work emergency. I nodded, feigning concern. "Everything okay? You've seemed a little off lately." Emily froze for a fraction of a second before plastering on a tight smile. "I'm fine. Just busy." She kissed me on the cheek, a mechanical gesture, and hurried out the door. The moment she left, I checked the camera footage from the night before. She'd spent nearly an hour texting Tyler, her face a mix of panic and frustration. At one point, she threw her phone onto the couch, muttering, "This is getting out of hand." Good. That was exactly the point. I decided to follow her again, knowing she was too distracted to notice. Sure enough, she didn't go to work. Instead, She drove to a park, a different one this time, where Tyler was already waiting. They sat on a secluded bench, talking in hushed tones. I couldn't hear them, but their body language spoke volumes. Tyler looked agitated, gesturing wildly, while Emily seemed to be pleading with him. I stayed hidden, snapping photos and recording their conversation from a distance using a directional microphone I'd picked up online. "We have to stop," Tyler was saying, his voice tight with frustration. "This isn't worth the risk anymore." Emily grabbed his arm, her tone sharp. "You don't get to decide that. I've handled it so far, haven't I?" "Handled it?" Tyler scoffed. "You're losing control. Someone emailed me, Emily. Someone knows." Emily's grip on his arm tightened. "Nobody knows. Ryan doesn't suspect a thing." I almost laughed out loud. Tyler pulled away, shaking his head. "You're delusional. I'm done with this. You can deal with your mess on your own." For a moment, I thought she might slap him. Instead, she stood up abruptly, her voice low and venomous. "Fine. Run away. But if you think you're walking away clean, think again." She stormed off, leaving Tyler sitting on the bench, his head in his hands. I didn't follow her this time. I had enough for now. When Emily came home later that evening, she was quieter than usual, her anger barely concealed beneath a thin layer of fake cheerfulness. "Long day?" I asked, watching her closely. She forced a smile. "You have no idea." We sat down for dinner, the silence between us heavy and loaded. I wanted to push her, to see how far I could go before she cracked. "By the way," I said casually, "I ran into Mark earlier. He mentioned seeing you downtown last week. Said you looked busy." Her fork froze halfway to her mouth, her eyes darting to mine. "Oh, that's weird. I haven't been downtown in ages." She lied so smoothly it almost impressed me. "Must have been someone else then," I said, letting the moment linger just long enough to make her squirm. After dinner, she disappeared into the bedroom, probably to call Tyler and try to salvage whatever was left of their pathetic fling. I didn't care. I had what I needed. The photos, the videos, the recordings, it was all coming together. Emily thought she was holding everything together, but the cracks were spreading. And soon the whole thing would collapse. She just didn't know it yet. Emily was unraveling, and it was a sight to behold. She left the house earlier than usual the next morning, her face tight with tension. No kiss, no forced pleasantries. Just a quick, clipped, "I'll see you later." Perfect. I spent the morning piecing together my evidence. The photos of her with Tyler at the hotel, the video from the park, the recorded audio of their argument, it was all damning. But it wasn't enough. I needed the final nail in the coffin. By midday, Mark texted me, "She's at the hotel again." Same guy. This was it. The perfect moment to strike. I drove to the hotel, parking a block away to avoid being seen. Sure enough, Emily's car was there, parked next to the black sedan. My chest tightened as I approached the entrance, the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. But I kept my cool. This wasn't the time for emotion. This was the time for precision. I walked into the lobby like I belonged there, casually making my way to the front desk. The clerk barely glanced at me as I leaned in and said, "Hi, I'm supposed to meet my wife here, but I forgot the room number." "Emily Blake." The clerk hesitated, looking me over. I gave him my best sheepish smile, pulling out my phone. "She texted me to meet her here, but my signal's terrible, and I can't get through. Could you help me out?" He bought it. A quick check of the computer, and he gave me the room number, 214. "Thanks," I said, my heart pounding as I headed for the elevator. I stopped outside the door to 214, listening. Muffled voices and laughter came from inside, along with the occasional creak of the bed. My hands clenched into fists, but I didn't knock. Not yet. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started recording. When I finally knocked, there was a pause before I heard Emily's voice, sharp and defensive. "Who is it?" "Room service," I said, pitching my voice low. The door opened a crack, and I shoved it open the rest of the way, stepping inside before Emily could react. She froze, standing in nothing but a sheet, her face a mask of pure horror. Tyler was scrambling to cover himself with the blanket, looking just as panicked. "Ryan." Emily's voice was barely a whisper, her eyes wide with shock. I let the silence hang heavy in the air, savoring the way her mask shattered completely. "Don't stop on my account," I said, my tone cold. "I'm just here to deliver something." I held up my phone, playing back the recording of their argument at the park. Emily's face turned white as the sound of her voice filled the room. "I told you he doesn't suspect anything," Tyler groaned, running a hand through his hair. "Jesus, Emily. You said—" "Shut up," she snapped, spinning to face him before turning back to me. "Ryan, I can explain." "Explain," I interrupted, laughing bitterly. "Go ahead. Explain the hotel, the jewelry, the lies. Explain how you've been sneaking around with him while coming home to me like nothing's wrong." Emily's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Tyler stood up, still clutching the blanket. "Look, man, I didn't know she was married. Okay? Save it," I snapped, cutting him off. "This isn't about you." I turned back to Emily, my voice dropping. "This is about her. About how she tore apart everything we built because she couldn't keep her lies straight." She started to cry then, the tears spilling down her cheeks as she stammered. "It didn't mean anything, Ryan. I swear, it wasn't serious." "Not serious," I said, my voice rising. "You destroyed our marriage for nothing?" She reached out for me, but I stepped back, holding up a hand. "Don't. Just don't." The room fell silent except for her quiet sobs. I turned to leave, pausing in the doorway. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," I said flatly. "And don't bother coming home. You made your choice." As I walked away, my chest was tight, a mix of anger and relief swirling inside me. The trap had closed, and Emily's perfect little facade was in ruins, and I was finally free. The drive home felt like a dream, though not the kind you wake up from refreshed. My mind replayed the scene in that hotel room on an endless loop. Emily's stunned face, Tyler's pathetic excuses, the lies spilling from her lips like venom. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the reality of what had happened settled over me like a weight I couldn't shake. This wasn't just a fight or some bump in the road. It was the end. I walked inside, the silence of the house almost mocking in its stillness. This was the home we'd built together, where we'd shared laughter, plans for the future. Everything I thought was solid and real. Now it was nothing more than a shell. I didn't wallow for long. I had work to do. The first call was to my lawyer, Tom. He was a no-nonsense kind of guy, exactly what I needed. I laid it all out for him. The affair, the evidence, everything. "This is a slam dunk," Tom said after I finished. "You've got irrefutable proof, Ryan. We'll push for a clean split. But if she tries to fight it, she's got no leg to stand on." His confidence was a small comfort. The next step was harder. I called Emily's parents. They'd always been kind to me, treating me like part of the family, but they needed to know. Her mom answered, her voice warm as ever. "Ryan, how are you?" I didn't sugarcoat it. "Not great, Carol. I'm calling because Emily's been cheating on me." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "What? That doesn't sound like Emily. Are you sure?" "I'm sure," I said firmly. "I've got photos, videos, the whole thing. I didn't want you to hear it from anyone else." Carol was silent for a moment, then said, "I'm so sorry, Ryan. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I replied, "but I thought you should know. She won't be coming back here." Carol promised to speak with Emily, though I doubted it would make much difference. As I hung up, my phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Please, let's talk. I can explain everything." I ignored it. Then another. "Ryan, I'm begging you. Don't do this. We can fix it." The audacity. The final straw came later that evening. Mark stopped by holding a six-pack of beer. "Figured you could use one," he said, stepping inside. I nodded, grateful for the gesture. As we sat in the living room, Mark glanced at the stack of papers on the table, the credit card statements, hotel receipts, printouts of texts. "She's not going to let this go easily," he said, cracking open a beer. "You know that, right?" "She doesn't have a choice," I replied. "It's over." We talked for hours, the weight of everything slowly lifting as I vented my anger and frustration. Mark didn't offer empty platitudes or tell me everything would be fine. He just listened, and for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of peace. When I finally checked my phone again, there were over a dozen missed calls from Emily and a flurry of texts ranging from apologetic to outright accusatory. But I didn't respond. She could scream into the void all she wanted. I was done playing her game. Emily's calls and texts became relentless over the next few days. At first, they were desperate, filled with apologies and promises to fix everything. Then they turned angry, full of accusations that I was being cruel and throwing away what we had. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Tom filed the divorce papers the following week. By then, Emily had moved in with a friend. At least, that's what she claimed in one of her many voicemails. I didn't care where she went. The house was mine now, both in practice and soon to be in paperwork. But the fallout wasn't over. Emily's parents reached out again, her mom pleading with me to reconsider. "She made a mistake, Ryan," Carol said over the phone. "She knows that now. Everyone deserves a second chance." "She didn't just make a mistake," I replied, my voice steady but firm. "She made a series of decisions, choices that she knew would hurt me, and she didn't care. This isn't something I can forgive." Carol tried to argue, but I cut the conversation short. There was nothing left to say. Then there was Tyler. He had the nerve to show up at my house one evening, unannounced. I spotted him through the window before he even knocked, standing on my porch like a lost puppy, his hands jammed in his pockets. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. "What do you want?" I asked, my tone cold. "Look, man, He hesitated, glancing at the ground. "I wanted to apologize. I didn't know she was married at first. And when I found out, she told me you two were separated. I swear if I'd known..." "You'd what?" I cut him off. "Walked away? Don't act like you're some innocent bystander. You knew exactly what you were doing." Tyler looked like he wanted to argue, but he must have thought better of it. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry," he said quietly. I didn't respond. I just shut the door in his face. As the days turned into weeks, the texts from Emily slowed, then stopped altogether. I heard through mutual friends that she was staying with her friend Ashley, trying to rebuild her life, whatever that meant. For me, the process was slower. The house felt empty, even though she hadn't taken much when she left. I'd catch myself walking into the kitchen, expecting to see her standing there, only to remember she was gone. But I didn't regret my decision. One evening, Mark came by again, this time with takeout. We sat on the back porch, eating in comfortable silence. "You're handling this better than I thought you would," he said after a while. I shrugged, staring out at the darkened yard. "It's not easy, but it's better than living in a lie." He nodded, sipping his beer. "What's next for you?" That was the question, wasn't it? For the first time in years, my future wasn't tied to someone else's. It was just mine. "I don't know," I admitted. "But whatever it is, it's going to be honest." Mark raised his bottle in a toast. "To honesty." I clinked my bottle against his, a small smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. Emily had taken a lot from me. Trust, time, love. But she hadn't broken me. I was still standing. And now I had a chance to start over. And this time I wouldn't settle for anything less than the truth. It started with a voice message. Not just any voice message. A misstep. A crack in the polished armor of my seemingly perfect life. I wasn't snooping, wasn't prying. Sarah, my wife, had accidentally left her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter. The familiar ping caught my attention. I was pouring us both glasses of wine after dinner, the kind of simple evening ritual we'd fallen into over the years. Nothing extraordinary. She was in the next room, laughing at something on TV, her voice ringing out like bells. Carefree, light. Then came the voice. Male. Deep, confident, teasing. "Don't forget what you promised me last night. Babe, you owe me." Felt like my ears misfired. A prank? A wrong number? But my hand froze over the counter. The wine bottle tipped slightly, spilling crimson over the white marble. I barely noticed. My chest tightened, instinctively rejecting what my brain was processing. I pressed play again, and again. Each time, the words were the same. The tone, the flirtation, the familiarity. By the time Sarah walked back into the room, I was gripping the phone so hard my knuckles had turned white. "Hey, what's taking so long?" she asked, oblivious. Her eyes flitted to the spilled wine, and she frowned. "Geez, Mike, are you okay? You're usually not this clumsy." She reached for the phone, but I was quicker. I locked it and placed it back on the counter, forcing myself to breathe. "Just tired," I lied. "Long day." She shrugged, picking up her glass like nothing had happened. But something had happened. The kind of thing you can't ignore or excuse. The kind that sits in your gut like a stone, cold and heavy. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Sarah was rushing out the door early, barely throwing a kiss my way. She claimed she was meeting a friend for brunch. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. But now, every move she made felt like a puzzle piece sliding into a larger, darker picture. I did something I'd never done before. I followed her. She didn't go to the cafe she mentioned. Instead, her car led me to a gym on the far side of town. I parked across the street, my heart hammering like a drum. Every part of me wanted to convince myself I was being ridiculous, paranoid even. But then, as I sat there watching the entrance, he appeared. Tall, athletic build, confident stride. The kind of guy who probably had a waiting list of admirers. Sarah greeted him in a way that left no room for doubt. Her smile was too bright, her body language too familiar. She leaned in close, brushing her hand against his arm. They didn't walk into the gym. They walked past it, into a small diner nearby. I could have confronted them right then and there, marched in like a scene from some bad soap opera. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed in my car, anger coiling inside me like a spring. This wasn't about catching her anymore. It was about understanding just how far this went. That evening, I decided to play along. When Sarah came home, I acted like everything was normal. I made dinner, cracked jokes, and even asked about her brunch. She lied so smoothly it made my stomach churn. "Oh, it was great," she said, barely looking up from her plate. "Stacy says hi, by the way." Stacy, her best friend from college. Always the convenient alibi. I didn't press. Not yet. Instead, I bided my time, letting her dig herself deeper. If she thought I was blind to the cracks in our life, she was dead wrong. What she didn't know was that I'd already made my decision. Whatever this thing between us had been, it was over. She just didn't know it yet. The morning after I followed Sarah to the diner, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in months. The game had begun, and I was no longer content to sit idly by while Sarah played me for a fool. But first, I needed proof. While Sarah was in the shower, I made my move. Her phone was on the nightstand, face down as always. This time, I wasn't interested in messages or voice notes. Those could be easily deleted. Instead, I went straight for her photos. She was meticulous about her phone. Everything perfectly organized. Albums labeled. No clutter. But one album stood out. Work events. It didn't make sense. Sarah's job wasn't the kind that required much traveling or schmoozing. Yet, here was an album filled with pictures of hotel rooms, fancy dinners, and selfies with the same guy I'd seen at the diner. In one photo, they were by a fireplace, drinks in hand, her head resting on his shoulder. The timestamp? The same weekend she told me she was on a girls' retreat with Stacy. My pulse pounded as I scrolled further, my hand trembling. Another picture, this time, Sarah kissing him on the cheek, his smirk directed straight at the camera. Felt like a punch to the gut. I barely had time to lock her phone and place it back before she stepped out of the bathroom. Towel wrapped around her, steam following in her wake. "Morning," she said, smiling like nothing was wrong. "You're up early." I nodded, forcing a smile. Couldn't sleep. If she noticed anything off, she didn't show it. That evening, I set the next part of my plan in motion. I didn't want her to suspect anything, so I played the devoted husband to perfection. I cooked her favorite dinner, opened a bottle of wine, and even brought up the trip I'd been planning for months. "I was thinking we could get away for a bit," I said, casually swirling my glass. "Just the two of us. Some time to reconnect." Her reaction was instant. She looked guilty, just for a split second. But then, she laughed it off. "Oh, that sounds amazing," she said. "But I've got a work thing next month. Maybe after that." A work thing. The same excuse she always used. "Of course," I replied, keeping my tone even. I wasn't surprised. The trip wasn't real, anyway. It was bait and she'd taken it. Later that night, while Sarah was asleep, I took my plan a step further. I logged into our shared bank account and pulled up her credit card transactions. I didn't need to dig far. Charges for restaurants and hotels I'd never heard of, all under the guise of business expenses. The kicker? A boutique jewelry store receipt dated 3 weeks ago. The same week she told me she was too busy to make it home for dinner. It was all lining up, every detail painting a picture I didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. Still, I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. The next day, I took a detour during my lunch break. The jewelry store was small and upscale, the kind of place where the staff knew their customers by name. When I walked in, a young woman behind the counter greeted me warmly. "Welcome. Can I help you find something special?" I slid my phone across the counter, pulling up the charge from Sarah's card. "I'm actually here about this purchase. I'm trying to confirm what it was." Her cheerful expression faltered. Sure. Let me check our records." A minute later, she returned, holding a file. That was for a men's bracelet. Engraved, actually. She hesitated, clearly unsure if she should continue. "Go on," I prompted, my voice tight. "It says the engraving was to D." "D," I repeated, my stomach twisting. She nodded. "That's all I have here. Sorry." I forced a polite smile, thanked her, and walked out, my mind racing. That night, Sarah came home late. She was unusually cheerful, almost glowing. She kissed me on the cheek as she dropped her bag by the door. "Long day?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "Exhausting," she replied, sighing dramatically. "Work is killing me lately." I nodded, pretending to sympathize. But in my mind, all I could think about was the bracelet. To D. Who the hell was D? I couldn't get the engraving out of my head. To D. The name was a lead, but it wasn't enough. I needed to find out who D was and how deep this rabbit hole went. Sarah was predictable in some ways, and that was my advantage. She had a habit of leaving her laptop open when she worked at home, trusting that I was too uninterested in her boring reports to snoop. She was wrong. The next evening, after she went to bed, I quietly slipped into the living room where her laptop sat on the coffee table. It wasn't locked, just asleep. I tapped the trackpad, and the screen flickered to life. Her email inbox was clean, too clean. She'd clearly deleted anything incriminating. But I knew there was always something people forget. And there it was, her calendar. She'd marked an appointment for Friday night. The location was a restaurant I'd never heard of, under the vague title Meeting with D. It wasn't just any restaurant either, it was an expensive place, the kind where reservations are booked months in advance. I stared at the entry, my heart racing. This was it. This was where I'd find my answers. Friday came faster than I expected. Sarah claimed she had to work late, kissing me goodbye as she left in her sleek black dress. Hair perfect, lips painted a deep red. "You look incredible," I said, forcing the words out. She gave me a coy smile, just trying to impress some clients. As the door clicked shut behind her, I grabbed my jacket and followed. The restaurant was tucked away in the heart of downtown, candlelit and intimate. I parked a block away and walked toward the entrance, keeping a low profile. Through the large windows, I scanned the dining room until I spotted her. There she was, sitting across from him. D. It was the same man from the diner, the gym. He was laughing, leaning in too close, his hand resting on hers across the table. Sarah's expression was one I hadn't seen in months. Soft, adoring, alive. I stood there, frozen, as a wave of emotions crashed over me. Anger, betrayal, humiliation. But beneath it all was a cold determination. This wasn't the time for an emotional outburst. This was the time to act. I pulled out my phone and snapped a few photos, my hands steady despite the storm raging inside me. Sarah might have been careless, but I wasn't going to be. Instead of confronting them, I walked away. But I wasn't going home. Not yet. By the time Sarah returned that night, I was waiting in the living room, sitting calmly on the couch. I dimmed the lights, the room bathed in a warm glow. "Hey, you're still up?" she said, her tone casual as she set her purse down. "Yeah," I replied evenly. "I thought we could talk." She froze for a fraction of a second before smiling. "Sure. What's up?" I gestured for her to sit across from me, and she complied, her movements cautious. "How was your meeting?" I asked, my voice steady. "Oh, the usual," she said with a shrug. "Nothing exciting." Her lie was smooth, practiced. I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "Funny, because I stopped by that restaurant tonight. The one where you were meeting clients." Her face went pale, the blood draining from her cheeks. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table between us, the screen glowing with the photos I'd taken. Her and Dee, laughing, holding hands, sharing a dessert. "Care to explain this?" I asked, my tone ice cold. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Mike, it's not what it looks like." "Really? Because it looks like you're on a date with a guy who isn't your husband." She shifted in her seat, her expression flickering between guilt and defiance. "Okay, fine," she snapped. "Yes, I had dinner with him, but it's not a big deal. We're just friends." I scoffed, the sound bitter. Friends don't buy each other engraved bracelets. Friends don't sneak around behind their spouse's back. Her jaw tightened. "You've been spying on me? Don't turn this around on me." I shot back, my voice rising. "You're the one lying. You're the one cheating." The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. Sarah stared at me, her eyes narrowing. "You want the truth?" she said, her voice sharp, cutting. "Fine. Yes, I've been seeing him. But maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't have to." The words hit me like a slap, but I refused to let her see the pain. "You're unbelievable," I said, standing up. "You think this is my fault? You're the one who destroyed this marriage, Sarah." She stood too, her posture defiant. Maybe this marriage was already broken. I stared at her, searching for the woman I thought I knew, but all I saw was a stranger. "This isn't over," I said quietly, turning toward the door. "Not by a long shot." As I left the room, her voice followed me, mocking and cold. "Good luck figuring out what to do without me, Mike." But she had no idea what I was capable of. By the next morning, I had a plan. Sarah had underestimated me, assuming I'd crumble under her smug indifference and barbed remarks. But she didn't know the version of me that could be meticulous, cold, and calculating. If she wanted a war, I'd give her one. I started by gathering my arsenal. The photos, the bank statements, the receipts, I documented everything. Every lie she'd told, every instance of betrayal, was now neatly catalogued. This wasn't just about confrontation anymore. It was about leverage. But it wasn't enough to have evidence. I needed her to feel the weight of her actions. That evening, Sarah seemed unfazed, as if our confrontation the night before had been a minor inconvenience rather than a bombshell. She hummed to herself in the kitchen, chopping vegetables like the perfect wife, while I sat at the dining table silently watching. "You're awfully quiet," she said without turning around. "I've been thinking," I replied. "About what?" she asked, her tone light, dismissive. "About us," I said, leaning back in my chair. "And how we got here." She paused for a moment but didn't turn around. "Oh, come on, Mike. Are you really still upset about last night? I told you, it's not as bad as you're making it out to be." "Not as bad," I repeated, letting out a dry laugh. "Sarah, you're having an affair. I think that qualifies as bad." She slammed the knife down, spinning to face me. "Fine. Yes, I'm seeing someone else. But honestly, can you blame me?" Her words hung in the air, sharp and cruel. "Blame you?" I said, standing up slowly. "You're the one who turned our marriage into a joke." "Oh, spare me the pity act," she snapped, crossing her arms. "You've been boring for years, Mike. Predictable. Safe. I needed something more." Her words stung, but I kept my composure. "Well, if more means sneaking around like a coward, I guess you found exactly what you were looking for," I said, my voice cold. She rolled her eyes, waving her hand dismissively. "You wouldn't understand." "You're right," I said, walking toward her. "I don't understand, but I will." She frowned, confused. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You'll see," I said, my tone calm but laced with menace. Over the next few days, I played my part perfectly. I acted subdued, almost defeated, letting her believe she'd won. She seemed to relish it, her arrogance growing with each passing day. But behind the scenes, I was putting my plan into motion. The first step was to involve Stacy. She wasn't just Sarah's best friend. She was also the weak link. Stacy had always been talkative, especially after a drink or two, and I knew exactly how to use that to my advantage. I invited Stacy over under the guise of needing advice. She arrived, intrigued and perhaps a little too eager to hear about the drama. "I don't know what to do," I said, pouring her another glass of wine. "Sarah says she's not happy, but she won't tell me why. I just want to fix things." Stacy hesitated, the wine loosening her inhibitions. "Mike, She stopped, biting her lip. "What?" I pressed, leaning forward. "It's not my place to say," she said, glancing at the floor. "Please," I said, my voice cracking just enough to sound vulnerable. "I just want the truth." She sighed, then looked me in the eye. "Sarah's been seeing someone else." "I thought you knew." My stomach churned, but I kept my face neutral. "Who?" "His name's Derek," she admitted reluctantly. "They've been involved for a while now." Derek, D. The pieces were falling into place. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice heavy with feigned disappointment. "I thought it wasn't my business," she said, guilt creeping into her tone. "I didn't want to get in the middle of it." "Thanks for telling me now," I said, standing and walking to the kitchen to collect myself. When Stacy left, I had everything I needed. The final step of my plan was simple. Confront Sarah in a way she couldn't deny or twist. And this time, I wasn't doing it alone. I reached out to Derek. Finding him wasn't difficult. Sarah's photos and receipts had given me more than enough clues. I posed as a client looking for fitness training, booking a session at the gym where he worked. When I arrived, he greeted me with a smile, clearly unaware of who I was. "Derek, right?" I said, shaking his hand. "Yeah, that's me," he said confidently. I leaned in, my grip tightening. "I'm Mike, Sarah's husband." His smile faltered, his face paling. "Let's talk," I said, leading him to a quiet corner. By the time I left the gym, I'd laid my trap. Derek, rattled and cornered, had agreed to meet Sarah the next evening at our house. I assured him I wasn't interested in revenge, only closure. He bought it, but Sarah wouldn't know he was coming. Not yet. I set the stage, my evidence spread out on the coffee table like a court exhibit. When Derek walked through the door, Sarah would have no choice but to face the truth in its entirety. Tomorrow, everything would come crashing down. The next evening arrived with a heaviness in the air. Sarah was in the living room, scrolling through her phone like nothing had changed, completely oblivious to the storm I was about to unleash. I deliberately set the time for Derek's arrival when Sarah would be most relaxed, her guard down. She had poured herself a glass of wine and was wearing the oversized sweater she always wore at home, as if she didn't have a care in the world. I couldn't wait to shatter that illusion. "Hey," she called out as I walked into the room, her tone casual. "What's for dinner?" I didn't answer. Instead, I walked to the window and glanced at the driveway. Right on time. A car pulled up, its headlights cutting through the evening gloom. Sarah didn't notice at first, but when the knock at the door echoed through the house, her head jerked up. "Are we expecting someone?" she asked, frowning. "You could say that," I replied, my voice calm. Before she could press further, I walked to the door and opened it. There he was, Derek, looking awkward and unsure, like a deer caught in headlights. "Come on in," I said, stepping aside. The sound of Derek's voice saying, thanks," made Sarah's wine glass slip from her hand, shattering on the floor. Her eyes went wide, her face draining of color as Derek stepped into the living room. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, her voice sharp, defensive. "This," I said, gesturing between them, "is the end of the charade." Derek looked between us, clearly regretting his decision to come. "Mike, I thought you said—" "I said I wanted closure," I interrupted, turning to Sarah. "And that's exactly what we're all going to get tonight." She stood abruptly, her body tense like a coiled spring. "Mike, you're being ridiculous. Derek doesn't need to be here. This is between us." "Don't worry, Sarah," I said, my voice cold. He won't be here long. But I figured it was only fair to let him see what you've been hiding. I gestured to the coffee table, where I had laid out the photos, the bank statements, and the receipts. Every lie, every betrayal was there in black and white. What the hell is this? Sarah hissed, her voice rising. This, I said, my voice cutting through her protests, is proof that I'm not as stupid as you think I am. Her eyes darted to Derek, who looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. You told him? She snapped, her tone accusatory. Not exactly, I said. He just happened to be part of the puzzle. Derek raised his hands defensively. Look, I didn't know it was going to turn into this. I thought you were getting a divorce or something. Sarah shot him a venomous look. You thought? You're unbelievable. Unbelievable, I echoed, laughing bitterly. You've got some nerve, Sarah. You lied to me, snuck around, and now you're trying to blame him. She turned to me, her expression hardening. Oh, don't play the victim, Mike. You've been a checked-out, boring husband for years. I deserved better. I stepped closer, my anger boiling over. If you wanted out, you could have said something. You didn't have to turn our marriage into a goddamn joke. The room fell silent for a moment, the tension so thick it felt like it could snap at any second. Then Sarah smirked, her lips curling into something cruel and cold. You think you've won, don't you? Sitting there, playing detective, trying to catch me in the act. But guess what, Mike? You're still pathetic. All of this, it doesn't change a damn thing. Her words cut deeper than I expected, but I refused to let her see it. You're right, I said, my voice steady. It doesn't change what you've done, but it does change what happens next. She raised an eyebrow, trying to look unimpressed. Oh yeah? And what's that? I turned to Derek, who looked like he was trying to make himself invisible. You can go now. You're not the problem here anymore. Derek didn't need to be told twice. He muttered a quick, sorry man, and bolted for the door. As the door clicked shut, I faced Sarah, who was now glaring at me like a cornered animal. This is how it ends, Sarah, I said. You alone, with no one left to lie to. Her smirk faltered for the first time, her confidence cracking. What are you saying? I'm done, I said, my voice firm. Done being your doormat, your excuse, your cover story. You've burned every bridge we had, and now you get to live with the ashes. I walked toward the door, leaving her standing there amidst the evidence of her betrayal. As I reached the doorway, I glanced back one last time. You always said you deserved better, Sarah, I said. I hope you find it, but it won't be me. And with that, I walked out, leaving her to confront the ruins of the life she had so casually destroyed. The cold air hit me as I stepped outside, a stark contrast to the boiling chaos I just left behind. My heart was pounding, my breath sharp and shallow, but I didn't stop walking. I wasn't sure where I was going, but it didn't matter. For the first time in years, I felt free. Behind me, the house stood like a monument to everything that had gone wrong. I imagined Sarah inside, fuming, pacing, or maybe even crying, but I didn't care. Not anymore. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I didn't need to look to know who it was. Sarah wasn't the type to let anyone else have the last word. But I wasn't ready to deal with her, not yet. I needed to think, to breathe, to figure out what came next. The first call I made was to my best friend, Ryan. We hadn't talked much in the past year. Sarah always found a way to monopolize my time or guilt me into staying home when I tried to reconnect with people. But now I needed him. Mike, Ryan answered, his voice groggy. It's me, I said, my throat tight. Can you talk? Yeah, man. What's going on? I hesitated, the weight of everything threatening to crush me. But then, like a dam breaking, it all came pouring out. The affair, the lies, the confrontation. Holy crap, Ryan said when I finished. I knew she was trouble, but I didn't think she'd stoop that low. I let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, well, I didn't think I'd be the idiot who didn't see it coming. You're not an idiot, he said firmly. You trusted her. That's not a weakness. It's what a husband's supposed to do. She's the one who blew it, not you. We talked for hours, the conversation drifting between anger, regret, and cautious plans for the future. By the time I hung up, I felt lighter, like I'd finally started to untangle myself from the wreckage Sarah had left behind. The next few days were surreal. Sarah called constantly at first, her messages swinging wildly between anger, guilt, and attempts to manipulate me. "You're overreacting, Mike. We can fix this. I don't even care about Derek. It was just a fling. You're throwing everything away over one mistake? You're pathetic." I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I focused on myself. I started packing a bag, sorting through what I wanted to take and what I was ready to leave behind. The house was ours legally, but I didn't care about fighting for it. Let her have the damn place, it was tainted now anyway. I spent one final night there, alone, sitting on the couch with a drink in hand. The silence was deafening, but it was better than the constant tension that had filled the house for months. The next morning, I took the final step. I called a lawyer. The meeting was quick and professional. I laid out the situation, handed over the evidence, and listened as they explained my options. Divorce wasn't going to be easy. It never is, but I was ready. When I got home, Sarah was waiting for me. "You didn't come home last night," she said, her tone accusatory. I ignored her, brushing past to grab my packed bag from the bedroom. "Mike, seriously, you're not even going to talk to me? There's nothing left to say, Sarah?" I said, slinging the bag over my shoulder. Her face twisted, a mix of anger and desperation. "So that's it? You're just walking out?" "Yes," I said simply. "Because unlike you, I know when to leave something that's broken beyond repair." She followed me to the door, her voice rising. "You're such a coward, running away because you can't handle the truth." I stopped, turning to face her one last time. "No, Sarah. I'm walking away because I've finally seen the truth. And I'm done pretending that this," I gestured between us, "is anything worth saving." Her jaw clenched, and for a moment, I thought she might try to stop me. But she didn't. She just stood there, her hands clenched into fists, watching as I walked out the door. I didn't look back. The road ahead was uncertain, and I knew there would be hard days ahead. But as I drove away from the house, leaving Sarah and all her lies behind, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. I didn't expect Sarah to go quietly. The first sign came 2 days after I moved out. My phone buzzed with a notification, a long, scathing message from Sarah. But this wasn't the usual mix of insults and half-baked apologies. No, this was different. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Running off and leaving me to deal with everything. Well, guess what, Mike? People are going to know the truth. You've always been the problem, not me. I'm not the bad guy here, and I won't let you make me out to be." I stared at the screen, a mix of disbelief and exhaustion washing over me. She wasn't done manipulating. If she couldn't win me back, she was determined to ruin my reputation instead. That afternoon, the calls started coming in. Friends, coworkers, even distant relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years. "Mike, what's going on?" one of my old college buddies asked. "Sarah's been posting all over social media about how you abandoned her. She's saying you had some kind of breakdown." Breakdown, right? I logged into Facebook for the first time in weeks and was greeted by a flood of posts from Sarah. Carefully curated photos of her looking sad and reflective, paired with captions like, "I gave him everything and he just walked away. Some people don't value what they have until it's gone." And the comments? A stream of sympathetic responses. People calling me selfish, cold, ungrateful. Her narrative was working. I knew I had 2 choices: defend myself publicly or let her dig her own grave. After some deliberation, I chose the latter. Sarah had always been obsessed with controlling how people saw her, but the truth had a way of seeping through the cracks. All I had to do was wait. Meanwhile, the divorce process began to move forward. The lawyer I'd hired, a no-nonsense woman named Ellen, was sharp, thorough, and refreshingly direct. "She's going to try to play the victim," Ellen said during one of our meetings. "Women like her always do, but you've got the evidence, and as long as you stay calm and stick to the facts, we'll get through this." I nodded, feeling a flicker of relief. Someone was finally on my side. Then, about a week later, I got a text from Stacy. "Hey, can we talk? It's important." I debated ignoring her, but curiosity got the better of me. We met at a coffee shop downtown. Stacy looked nervous, fidgeting with her cup as she sat across from me. "Mike, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," she began. For what? I asked, folding my arms. For not telling you sooner, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. About Derek, about everything. I knew it wasn't right, but Sarah's my best friend. I didn't want to get in the middle of it. And now? I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. Stacy sighed, running a hand through her hair. Now she's lost it. She's telling everyone that you cheated on her, that you're unstable. It's not true, obviously, but she's doubling down. I thought you should know. I nodded, feeling a mix of anger and gratitude. Thanks for telling me. Anything else? She hesitated, then leaned forward. Mike, I think she's still seeing Derek. But he's freaking out. He doesn't want to be dragged into all this drama. If you talk to him, you might be able to get him on your side. I raised an eyebrow. You think he'd turn on her? Stacy shrugged. I think he's scared enough to do whatever it takes to save his own skin. That night, I made the call. Derek answered on the second ring. Hey, he said, his voice wary. Relax. I'm not calling to start a fight, I said. I just want to talk. There was a long pause. About what? Sarah, I said bluntly, and how she's dragging both of us through the mud. He sighed. Look, man, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't know she was married at first. And when I found out, you kept seeing her anyway. I finished for him. I know, okay? I messed up, but I didn't sign up for this circus. Then help me end it, I said. If she wants to play games, let's make sure she doesn't win. Derek hesitated, but eventually he agreed. The next morning, I filed an official statement with my lawyer, outlining everything. The affair, the social media smears, and Derek's involvement. I included screenshots of his text messages admitting to the relationship and his willingness to testify if needed. Sarah's perfect narrative was starting to crumble, and I could see the cracks forming. The fallout from Derek's cooperation hit like a wrecking ball. Once my lawyer filed his statement, everything began unraveling for Sarah. She'd spun her web of lies so tightly that when one thread was pulled, the entire thing fell apart. Ellen, my lawyer, called me a few days later, her voice calm but tinged with satisfaction. We've got her cornered, she said. Derek's testimony is solid. Combined with the evidence you've provided, it's clear who's been lying. This is going to tip the divorce in your favor. I couldn't help but smile, the weight on my chest lifting slightly. But I wasn't celebrating yet. Sarah wasn't the type to go down quietly. That evening, the storm finally broke. Started with a phone call. I was sitting in my new apartment, a small but cozy space I'd rented downtown, the kind of place that felt like a fresh start. When my phone rang, I saw Sarah's name on the screen. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but something told me to answer. What do you want, Sarah? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She didn't start with pleasantries. You've ruined my life, she hissed. I leaned back in my chair, my grip on the phone tightening. Ruined your life? That's rich, coming from you. You're turning everyone against me, she snapped. Do you know how many people have called me today, asking about Derek? You're making me look like a fool. You did that all on your own, I said coldly. Her voice cracked, a mix of anger and desperation. Do you really hate me that much, Mike? After everything we've been through? I let out a bitter laugh. After everything we've been through? You cheated, Sarah. You lied to me, to everyone. And now you're mad because people are finding out. There was a long pause, the silence heavy. When she spoke again, her tone was softer, almost pleading. Mike, we can fix this, she said. We don't have to let it end like this. I closed my eyes, letting out a slow breath. Sarah, it's already over. It's been over for a long time. You just didn't want to admit it. Her voice hardened again, the facade of remorse slipping. Fine. You want to play dirty? Two can play that game. I hung up before she could say anything else. True to her word, Sarah didn't hold back. The next day, she posted a scathing update on social media, accusing me of manipulating Derek and orchestrating a smear campaign. But this time, it didn't have the effect she hoped for. Derek, likely fed up with being dragged into her mess, posted his own statement online. It was brief but damning. I want to clarify that my relationship with Sarah was a mistake. I was unaware of her marital status initially, and I regret my involvement. Mike is not to blame for any of this, and I support his decision to end their marriage. The comments section exploded. People who had previously defended Sarah began turning on her, questioning her motives and calling her out for her lies. By the end of the week, Sarah's carefully crafted image was in shambles. I started hearing from mutual friends who'd once taken her side. They called to apologize, to tell me they had no idea what she was really like. Some even offered to testify on my behalf in the divorce proceedings. One message stood out, though. It was from Stacy. "She's furious. Be careful, Mike. She's not done with you yet." That night, as I sat in my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Sarah had always been relentless when she felt cornered. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a notification. It wasn't a text or a call. It was an alert from my bank. My heart sank as I opened the app and saw the charge. Thousands of dollars transferred from our joint account to an unknown recipient. The next morning, I called Ellen, my lawyer, and told her what happened. She was calm but firm. "We'll handle it," she assured me. "It's illegal for her to touch shared funds during an active divorce. This will only hurt her case." But it wasn't just about the money. It was about Sarah's desperation. She was spiraling, and I knew it was only a matter of time before she did something even more reckless. 2 days later, I got the confirmation I'd been waiting for. Ellen called me, her tone triumphant. "The judge has approved an emergency motion. Sarah is officially restricted from accessing any shared assets, and Derek's testimony has been entered into the record. You're in a strong position, Mike." I thanked her, feeling a sense of relief for the first time in weeks. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Sarah was still out there, still fuming, still plotting. And while the legal battle might have been tilting in my favor, I wasn't sure what her next move would be. I just knew it wouldn't be pretty. It didn't take long for Sarah to make her next move. I woke up to a barrage of messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. College friends, co-workers, even my mother. Each one carried the same shocked tone, asking if I'd seen Sarah's latest stunt. I opened my phone to find a post she'd made, plastered across every social media platform. A long, dramatic essay where she painted herself as the tragic heroine and me as a cruel, manipulative villain. When someone you love turns on you, it breaks something inside you. I tried to save our marriage, but Mike refused. He's been spreading lies, dragging my name through the mud, and now he's trying to take everything from me. I just want peace. Attached to the post were photos, carefully cropped and edited moments from our life together. Us laughing at a dinner party, a vacation selfie from years ago, smiling, holding hands. She framed her narrative perfectly, like a courtroom exhibit designed to sway public opinion. The comments were a mix of outrage and skepticism. Some people bought into her sob story. "Stay strong, Sarah. You deserve better than him. Mike sounds like a narcissist. You're better off without him." But others were sharper, more critical. "Didn't you have an affair? Maybe focus on taking accountability instead of playing the victim. We've seen Derek's statement, Sarah. You're not fooling anyone." I didn't respond. Ellen had warned me about this exact scenario. "She wants you to react," she'd said. "The best thing you can do is stay quiet and let her burn herself out." But staying quiet wasn't easy. Sarah's post spread like wildfire, reaching people in our shared social circles and beyond. For every person who saw through her lies, there were two who didn't, and the rumors began to spiral. It wasn't just my reputation at stake anymore. It was my career, my friendships, everything I'd spent years building. That night, as I sat in my apartment scrolling through the chaos, my phone buzzed. It was Stacy again. "She's not stopping, Mike. She's telling people you were abusive, that you controlled her." I stared at the message, my hands trembling with rage. I'd never laid a hand on Sarah, never raised my voice in anger until the night of the confrontation. And now she was weaponizing something so vile, so damaging, to protect her own crumbling facade. The next morning I called Ellen. "This has to stop," I said, my voice shaking. "She's digging her own grave," Ellen replied calmly. "The more she lies, the easier it is for us to prove she's unreliable." "But this isn't just about the divorce anymore," I said. "She's trying to ruin my life." Ellen was silent for a moment. "There's another option," she said finally. We can file for a restraining order. It won't stop her from posting, but it will send a message that we're taking this seriously. And if she violates the terms, she'll face legal consequences. Do it, I said without hesitation. The restraining order was filed the next day, and within hours, Sarah was served. I braced myself for her reaction, knowing it wouldn't be pretty. And I was right. That evening, my phone rang. It wasn't Sarah, it was her mother. "Mike, what the hell is going on?" she demanded, her voice sharp. I explained everything as calmly as I could. The affair, the lies, the smear campaign. Her mother listened in silence, and when I finished, she let out a heavy sigh. I knew she was being reckless, but this, she said, her tone weary. "I don't know what's gotten into her, Mike. She's always had a temper, but this is something else. She's trying to destroy me," I said bluntly. Her mother didn't argue. "I'll talk to her," she said, "but don't expect miracles." The next day, the tide began to turn. Word of the restraining order spread quickly, and it cast a long shadow over Sarah's narrative. People started questioning her motives, wondering why she'd gone to such extremes. Then Derek chimed in again. In a live video posted to his social media, he addressed Sarah directly, his frustration boiling over. "Enough is enough," he said, his tone sharp. "You lied to me, you lied to Mike, and now you're lying to everyone else. Stop dragging us down with you." The backlash was immediate. People who'd once defended Sarah began turning on her in droves, their comments scathing. "So Derek and Mike are both lying?" "Sure, January. This is pathetic. Own up to your mistakes, Sarah." By the end of the week, Sarah had gone silent. Her posts stopped. Her friends stopped defending her. Even Stacy messaged me, saying Sarah had cut her off entirely. "She's isolating herself," Stacy wrote. "I think she's finally realizing she's lost." For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. But I knew this wasn't the final chapter. Sarah might have retreated, but she wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. There was still one final confrontation ahead. It happened on a rainy Wednesday evening, weeks after Sarah had gone silent. The divorce proceedings were well underway. The restraining order had worked to keep her at bay, and the smear campaign had backfired spectacularly. For the first time in months, I was beginning to feel like myself again. Then she showed up. I was sitting in my apartment, the soft hum of the television in the background, when the knock came. It was sharp, insistent, impossible to ignore. I opened the door to find Sarah standing there, drenched from the rain. Her hair was plastered to her face, her eyes wild and red-rimmed. She didn't look like the confident, composed woman I'd known. She looked desperate. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice firm. "I just need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, Mike. 5 minutes." Every instinct told me to close the door, to walk away, but something in her eyes stopped me. I stepped aside, gesturing for her to come in. She stood in the middle of the living room, dripping water onto the floor, clutching her purse like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "Say what you need to say," I said, crossing my arms. She hesitated, her gaze flickering around the room as if searching for an escape route. Then, she let out a shaky breath and looked me in the eye. "I messed up," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I did, but I need you to understand. I never meant for it to go this far." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You didn't mean for it to go this far? Sarah, you torched our marriage, dragged my name through the mud, and tried to destroy me. What exactly did you mean to happen?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the woman I'd once loved. "I was angry, okay? I was scared. When you started pulling away, I felt like I was losing control, and I made bad choices." "Bad choices," I repeated, my voice rising. "You call cheating and lying for months a bad choice? That's not a mistake, Sarah. That's a pattern. A decision you made over and over again." She flinched but didn't look away. "I didn't know how to fix it," she said, her voice cracking. "And when you started fighting back, I panicked. I thought if I could control the narrative, maybe I could salvage something. But I was wrong. I see that now. Too little, too late," I said coldly. Her tears spilled over, and she took a shaky step toward me. "Mike, I don't want to lose everything. I don't want to lose you. I took a step back, keeping the distance between us. You already did, Sarah. The moment you decided to betray me, you lost me. This isn't something you can fix with an apology. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The rain outside pounded against the windows, filling the silence between us. Finally, she nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I guess I deserve that, she said softly. She turned to leave, but before she reached the door, she paused, glancing back at me. For what it's worth, she said, her voice barely audible. I did love you, Mike. I don't know how to be the person you deserved. I stared at her, my emotions a whirlwind of anger, sadness, and something I couldn't quite name. Goodbye, Sarah, I said, my voice steady. She hesitated for a moment longer, then opened the door and disappeared into the rain. The next day, I filed the final paperwork for the divorce. Sarah didn't contest it, and within weeks, the process was complete. In the months that followed, I rebuilt my life piece by piece. I reconnected with friends, threw myself into work, and even started seeing a therapist to process everything I'd been through. It wasn't easy. There were days when the anger and betrayal felt like too much to carry. But with time, the wounds began to heal. If there's one thing I learned from this nightmare, it's that love isn't enough. Trust, respect, and honesty are the foundation of any relationship, and without them, love can't survive. As for Sarah, I haven't heard from her since that night. I don't know where she is or what she's doing, and honestly, I don't care. All I know is that I'm free, and that's enough.